The Legend of the Streels, Chapter 41 of Shardik by Richard Adams. Still he could not bring himself to speak of the past. At last he said, "Where are you going, Sayet?" She made no immediate answer, but after a little asked, "Keldrek, are you seeking Lord Shardik?" "Yes." "With what purpose?" He startled, remembering her strange power of discerning more than had been spoken. If she had perceived the intention which he had formed, she would no doubt try to dissuade him, though God knew she of all people had little reason to wish to prolong his life. Then he realized of what it was that she must be thinking. "Lord Shardik will never return to Bekla," he said. "That's certain enough, and neither shall I." "Are you not king of Bekla?" "No longer." They left the creek and began to follow a track leading eastward over the next ridge. The Tuginda climbed slowly, and more than once stopped to rest. "She has no strength now for this life," he thought. "Even were there no danger, she ought not to be here." He began to wonder how he could persuade her to return to Kiso. "Sayet, why have you come here? Are you also seeking Shardik?" "I received news in Kiso that Lord Shardik was gone from Bekla, and then that he had crossed the plain to the hills west of Gelt. Naturally, I set out in search of him." "But why, Sayet? You should not have undertaken such a journey. The hardship—" "You forget, Keldrek." Her voice was hard. "As Tuginda of Kiso, I am bound to follow Lord Shardik while that is possible. That is, while the power of God is not subjected to the power of men." He was silent, full of shame. But later, as she was leading the way downhill, he asked, "But your women, the other priestesses, did you not leave Kiso alone?" "No, I received news also of the advance north of Santil Cair Ketlis. I had known already that he meant to march in the spring, and that he intended to take Kabin. Neelith and 3 other girls set out for Kabin with me. We planned to seek Lord Shardik from there." "Did you speak with her, Ketlis?" "I spoke with Elroth of Sarkid, who told me how it came about that he escaped from Bekla. He was well disposed towards me, because some time ago I cured his sister's husband of a poisoned arm. He told me also that Lord Shardik had crossed the Vraco in the foothills north of Kabin, not 2 days before." "You say Elroth treated you as a friend, and yet he allowed you to go alone and unescorted across the Vraco?" "He does not know that I have crossed the Vraco. Elroth was friendly to me, but on one thing I could not move him. He would lend me no help to find Lord Shardik or save his life. To him and his soldiers, Shardik means nothing but the god of their enemies and of all they are fighting against." She paused, and then, with a momentary tremor in her voice, added, "He said, the god of the slave traders." Keldrek had not thought that he could suffer more bitterly. "He told me of his son," went on the Tuginda, "and after that I asked nothing more of him. He told me, too, that some of his soldiers had come upon Lord Shardik in the hills and felt sure that he was dying. I asked him why they had not killed him, and he replied that they had been afraid to attempt it. So I do not myself believe that Lord Shardik is dying." At this he was about to speak, but she went on. "I had hoped that Elroth might give me some soldiers to conduct us across the Vraco, but when I saw that it was useless to ask, I let him believe that we meant to return to Kiso, for he would certainly have stopped me from crossing the Vraco alone." "But would none of the girls come with you, Sayet? Do you think that I would bring them into this country, the thieves' kitchen of the world? They begged to come. I told them to return to Kiso, and since they are bound by oath to obey me, they went. After that I bribed the guards at the ford, and once across the river I turned north, as you did." "Sayet, where do you mean to go now?" "I believe that Shardik is trying to return to his own country. He is making for the Teltherna, and will cross it if he can. Therefore I am going to Zeray, to seek help in watching for him along the western shore. Or, if he has already swum the Teltherna, we may learn of it in Zeray." "Elroth perhaps was right. Shardik may indeed be dying, for since leaving Bekla he has once more been wickedly and cruelly wounded." She stopped, turned, and stared up at him. "Did Elroth tell you that?" He shook his head. She sat down, but said no more, only continuing to look at him with eyes full of uncertainty and questioning. Seeking for further words, he burst out, "Say it! The Streels of Urta! What is their mystery and their meaning?" At this she gave a quick, low gasp, as it were of dread and consternation, but then, recovering herself, answered, "You had better tell me what you know yourself." He told her how he had followed Shardik out of Bekla, and of their crossing of the plain. She listened silently until he came to the adventure at Urta, but as he spoke of his awakening and of the wounded Shardik climbing from the Streel to scatter his attackers, she began to weep bitterly, sobbing aloud, as women mourn for the dead. Appalled by this passionate grief in one whom he had hitherto thought of as stretching out her sceptre over all ills besetting the heart of man, he waited with a hopeless leaden patience, not presuming to intrude upon her sorrow, since he perceived that it flowed from some bitter knowledge which he too must presently possess. At length, becoming calmer, she began to speak. Her voice was like that of a woman who, having learned of some terrible bereavement, understands that henceforth her life will be a waiting for death. "You asked me, Kelderek, about the Streels of Urta. I will tell you what I know, though that is little enough, for the cult is a close secret inherited by each generation, and such is the fear of it that I never heard of any who dared to pry into those mysteries. But though, thank God, I have never seen the Streels, a little I know. The little I have been told because I am the Tuginda of Kiso. How deep the Streels are no one knows, for none has ever descended into their depths and returned. Some say they are the mouths of hell, and that the souls of the wicked enter them by night. They say, too, that only to look down and cry aloud into the Streels is sufficient to awaken a torment that will drive a man mad." Kelderek, his eyes on her face, nodded. "It is true." "And how old the cult is no one knows, or what it is they worship. But this I can tell you. Always, for hundreds of years, their mystery at Urta has been the bringing of retribution upon the wicked, those, that is, for whom such retribution has been ordained by God. Many are wicked, as well you know, yet not all the wicked find their way to the Streels. This, or so I have always understood, is the way of that dreadful business. The evil-doer is one whose crime cries out to heaven, beyond restitution or forgiveness, one whose life, continuing, defiles the very earth. And it is always by some accident that he appears to come to Urta. He is in ignorance of the nature of the place to which his journey has led him. He may be attended, or he may be alone, but always he himself believes that it is chance, or some business of his own, which has brought him to Urta of his own free will. Yet those who watch there, those who see him come, they recognize him for what he is, and know what they have to do. They speak him fair, and treat him courteously, for however foul his crime, it is none of their duty to hate him, any more than the lightning hates the tree. They are but the agents of God. And they will not trick him either. He must be shown the place, and asked whether he knows its name. Only when he answers no do they persuade him towards the Streels. Even then he must—" She stopped suddenly and looked up at Kelderek. "Did you enter the Streel?" "No, Sayet. As I told you, I know what you told me. I am asking you, are you sure that you did not enter the Streel?" He stared at her, frowning, then nodded. "I am sure, Sayet." He must enter the Streel of his own accord. Once he has done that, nothing can save him. It becomes their task to kill him and cast his body into the depths of the Streel. Some who have died there have been men of rank and power, but all have been guilty of some deed whose vileness and cruelty prey upon the very minds of those who hear it. You will have heard of Hispus, for he came to Ortelga. Kelderek closed his eyes, beating one hand upon his knee. "I remember. Would to God I did not." "Did you know that he died in the Streels? He intended to escape to Bekla, or perhaps to Paltesh, but it was to Urta that he came." "I didn't know. They only say that he vanished." "Very few know what I have told you. Priests and rulers, for the most part. There was King Menverzon of Terkenalt, he that was grandfather of King Karnat the Tall. He burned alive his dead brother's wife, together with their little son, his nephew, the rightful king, whose life and throne he had sworn to defend. 5 years later, being on the plain of Bekla at the head of his army, he came to Urta with a few followers, his purpose, so he thought, being to spy out that land for himself. He ran screaming into the Streel, flying from none but a little herd boy who was driving sheep, or perhaps from some other little boy that no one else could see. They saw him draw his sword, but he flung it to the ground as he ran, and there no doubt it lies to this day, for no possession of a victim is ever taken, buried, or destroyed. You say that all who enter the Streels must die? Yes, from that moment their death is certain. One respite only there may be, but it is rare, almost unknown. Once in 100 years, perhaps it may happen that the victim comes alive from the Streel, and then they will not touch him, for that is a sign that God has sanctified him, and intends to make use of his death for some blessed and mysterious purpose of his own. Long, long ago, there was a girl who fled with her lover across the Beklan plain. Her 2 brothers, hard, cruel men, were following, for they meant to kill them both, and she saw that her lover was afraid. She was determined to save him, and she stole away by night, and came upon her brothers as they slept, and for his sake, because she dared not kill them, she blinded them both in their sleep. Later, how I do not know, she came alone to Urta, and there she was stabbed and thrown down as she lay in the Streel. But that night she climbed out alive, though wounded almost to death. They let her go, and she died in giving birth to a boy. That boy was the hero Udaperioth, the liberator of Yelda, and the first ban of Sarkid. And that is why Elroth knows what you have told me? He would know that and more besides, for the house of Sarkid has been honored by the priests of Urta from that day to this. He would certainly have received news of what befell Lord Shardik and yourself at Urta. How is it that I never learned of the Streels in Bekla? I knew much, for men were paid to tell me all, yet this I never knew. Few know, and of them none would tell you. But you have told me. She began to weep once more. Now I believe what Elroth said to me at Cabin. I know why his men did not hurt Lord Shardik, and why he spared your life also. No doubt he was not told that you yourself had not entered the Streel. He would indeed be insistent that your life must be spared, for once he knew that Lord Shardik, and you, as he supposed, had come alive from the Streels, he would know too that neither must be touched on pain of sacrilege. Shardik's death is appointed by God, and it is certain, certain. She seemed exhausted with grief. Keldrak took her hand. But Sayet, Lord Shardik is guilty of no evil. She lifted her head, staring out over the dismal woods. Shardik has committed no evil. She turned and looked full into his eyes. Shardik, no. Shardik has committed no evil.